Welcome. In this lecture, we're going to talk about perception, self, and communication. And so we're going to talk about your self-concept, self-esteem, and self-efficacy. So let's get started, shall we? So what is perception and why does it matter? Perception is the process of interpreting and making sense of the world. It shapes how we see ourselves and others. It influences communication choices and relationships. So an example might be that two people may hear the same message, but they interpret it differently. So let's look at the perception process. It begins with selection, noticing certain stimuli, certain things, certain words, certain things in the that you're looking at, and your attention is drawn while ignoring others. And then the second part of the perception process is organization. So in our minds, we put these things in order, in patterns. And then the third part is interpretation. So we make meaning, we gather meaning from what we perceive. And so here's an example. Sometimes, or some of us may interpret silence as anger or stress. May not be either, but it might be our perception. So there are factors that influence perception. They're physiological, such as your senses, your fatigue, or your health. But there's also psychological, your mood, your emotions, your mental state. Think about how your own sense of self, your own self-perception is affected by the physiological or the psychological. And then there's social. And this is the roles that we play, the culture that we live in, or the expectation of ourselves or others. And then their past experiences, and this shapes the perception of ourselves, perception of others, and it sometimes shapes our current interpretation. So things might have changed, but we still think of it as it was in the past because of our perception. So an example here is a hungry person and who perceives food ads more strongly. So perception and self, let's take a look at how we perceive ourselves. It's our self-concept, which is the perception of who we are. And it's influenced by communication with others. So we're our looking glass self is what the text talks about. And this is seeing ourselves as others see us. And this may not be true about ourselves, but because we might value the opinions of others, then this is how we see ourselves. An example is being told that you're confident. You're a confident person, and that may shape your self-esteem. The more that someone that you value says you're a confident person, the more confident you may feel. So let's look at self-esteem and communication, shall we? Self-esteem equals the evaluation of self-worth. It's our evaluation of our self-worth. So if you've got high self-esteem, you're more assertive with your communication. However, low self-esteem, you might avoid or misinterpret messages. So you might not be as assertive, you might not be as communicative if you have low self-esteem. So an example here is a student who may avoid public speaking because they have low self-esteem about their ability to speak well in public. Now, there's such a thing as self-fulfilling prophecies. Have you ever heard of self-fulfilling prophecies? What are they? Well, take a look at the diagram and think about it like this. if we have a belief or an expectation of that something is going to happen, whether it's positive or negative, then excuse me, our behaviors may follow the belief. An example here is, I'll fail my speech class. I'm nervous and I'm a poor performer. And so I think it was Henry Ford who said, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. So in this self-fulfilling prophecy, in this diagram, you have the prophecy, which in this example, I'll fail my speech class. And then that influences how well you do in the class. And since you had the expected outcome of failure, then it confirms the prophecy and then it happens. However, this can change. This is what we call a growth or fixed mindset. And so if you change the way you think and shift from an I can't, I'll fail, to I will do my best and I'll succeed, if you switch your mindset, then that self-fulfilling prophecy on the positive side will also work for you. So let's look at identity and culture. So our identity is shaped by our culture, our gender, our ethnicity roles. And so think about it like this. There are some cultures that are individualistic. In America, for the most part, not all of the US, because certain ethnicities who have strong family ties are not individualistic, but our culture overall in the United States of America is considered to be individualistic. And what that means is that we've got to do things right. When we grow up, we've got to move out of our parents' house as soon as possible because we've got to prove ourselves in society. However, in some cultures, it's more what's called collectivist. And so this means that you don't necessarily have to move out of your parents' house. And sometimes even when you get married, your parents don't want you to move. And so an example is I am, which is independent, which is versus I am part of a family, which means that you're part of a collectivist mentality. So there are barriers to perception and communication, such as stereotyping, and this is oversimplified assumptions. So you look at something or someone and you think, that person has to be that way. That's how I know them to be. That's how they always are going to be. Now that's a stereotype because people can change. And then we have first impressions. This is where we might meet someone for the first time. Let's say the person was loud. And you always think that that person is going to be loud. That may not necessarily be true. Then we have attribution errors, which is misjudging causes or beliefs. An example here is assuming that somebody is rude when they're just shy. So we can improve our self-perception and our self-awareness. We can recognize our own biases and we can seek feedback from others. You might ask a mentor, a person who you trust, how can I change? What can I do to grow? And you need to be mindful and empathetic. That's how you can kind of change. And then practice perspective taking. And that means you ask, what else could explain this behavior? Instead of jumping to conclusions, you broaden your mind, you ask some questions, give people the benefit of the doubt, and move beyond your mindset. So hopefully what you'll take away from this lecture is that perception shapes communication and relationships. Self-concept and self-esteem affect interactions with your friends, with your family, with your significant other, in classrooms, and that culture, roles, and expectations shape identity. And finally, awareness improves perception accuracy. We're never just one thing. We can change. I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.